Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, yWhales, wherever in the world you are. As we continue this series, I think we're at about 50 episodes that we've recorded so far. We're getting a lot of really dynamic, guests to come on here. And today is, I think, one of easily the most recognizable names in Web3 blockchain technology. And we've got Dmitry Buterin here with us today. And I have so many questions related not just to the technology, but also just kind of the nurturing of a thought leader in this world from a father's perspective. So there's so many things we're going to get into, and again, Goss is back in Switzerland, so he's taking a break from the Crypto Hobo Roadshow. So we're thrilled to have you back, sir. Let's go ahead and jump right over. Dmitry, let's kind of start with a little bit of the background. How early did you even start seeing, cryptocurrency, kind of Bitcoin and starting to think that this was something cool? Because your background is a little bit of fintech, correct?
Yeah, you can say that. I mean, I grew up in the Soviet Union, right? And in the Soviet Union, there was no private enterprise. It was all state, which was a really fascinating background for me when I ended up becoming an entrepreneur because, again, it was unknown. The state is supposed to do everything and anything for us. And it was actually very bad at that. So that was actually a great foundation for my current conviction about entrepreneurship and things like that. And and then I lived through the Soviet Union falling apart and became an accidental entrepreneur and basically did that for a couple of decades. And then a few years ago, I pretty much retired. Um, and I forgot where you started with your question. In
What
terms
what
of
what?
crypto, no, I remember it now. Like I've always been a technologist, right? Like I started computer science in the university, and I had a job at a bank as a software engineer. Then I worked for a big multinational company in kind of computer services department. And then I co-founded a business with a couple of friends and a Danish company. And so I've been in technology, and I also have a very curious mind. So I always kind of been reading a lot of stuff and listening to lots of podcasts and whatnot. And I think it was the podcast by Steve Gibson, which might still be running. I listened to that podcast for over a decade. It's a great podcast about security. That's kind of one of my hobbies, if you will. But he also is a guy with a very curious mind, and he mentioned Bitcoin. I believe that was probably in 2011, and and I was very curious about it. And that time, I did not really get deeply into that, but the technology sounded fascinating because kind of I understood a few reference points from which Bitcoin was created. Like, for example, the hashing solutions that people try to apply to email spam and stuff like that. So like it felt like this is something very interesting. And I mentioned that to my son, but I didn't really do much about it then for a while, just because I had a business. You can say a growing business or a struggling business. Quite often that's one and the same.
I was
And
going to say it's the
yeah,
same
yeah,
verbiage.
exactly right. And I had a son, and I had a very young daughter, so I was very busy. So I didn't really spend much time on that. But as I mentioned that Bitcoin to my son, and he got really fascinated by that, and he started going deeper and deeper into that, right? And so I guess he was what was he? He was about 17 back then, and obviously as a young adult and kind of no earlier yeah, around that time, 16, 17. And I was very curious and kind of like how his life is unfolding. He was in high school, right? And then he ended up really going into this whole crypto and Bitcoin space. And I guess one major involvement of his that I started tracking was he was a co-founder and a writer for Bitcoin magazine, which was a really fascinating enterprise too, because when they started that, I was very surprised that they decided to do actual print publication. I actually have a few a bunch of copies from 2011, 2012, 2013 from that magazine, and the magazine was really fascinating. That it was dedicated to crypto and Bitcoin, obviously very early on, and it's a very nice, high color, glossy, high beautiful production. and they managed to build a business out of that, right? Which so I was watching that. I was reading basically in each issue, half of the articles they were written by Vitalik or edited by him, and it was and I was as a proud father, if you will, and also as a very curious mind, I was reading a lot of his stuff, and that was the foundation of my education about crypto, right? And then eventually, as he graduated from high school, then he went into University of Waterloo, studied computer science for a while, but then decided to drop out because he didn't quite connect with the academia, if you will, academic environment as such, and he really wanted to do something in the real world. And he traveled the world, got involved in a few different projects, and then I believe it was fall of 2013 when he shared with me his a draft of his white paper for Ethereum. And again, like I had by that time, I had somewhat decent, very superficial understanding of crypto. Obviously, Web3 was not invented; that particular label was not invented yet. But his gift is really expressing very complicated things in a very simple, easy to understand terms. So when I read the document, I'm like, oh wow, this sounds really interesting, even though I could not have envisioned how big it would have become, but it was definitely uh, a wonderful glimpse into possibilities of that, right? So kind of, and that's when it all started.
That's a really interesting, story. The fact that he started, kind of really in a public research type way with the magazine, and then flowed into here's my white paper, and clearly we know most of the rest of the story. Again, I really want to talk to you as a father, because
Mm-hmm.
I've got a 14-year-old son who trades cryptocurrencies, NFTs, all these things,
Yeah.
and really is interested in this stuff. How do you nurture without with boundaries, but also kind of understanding that it's like you have to finish high school, you have to at least pretend like college is important, but how did you
Yeah.
manage his interest levels, and still keep him focused on driving forward?
You know, the way I think about this is we as parents, what we do most of the time with our kids, generalizing, is we all have our own view of the world, our fears, our desires, and then what we do is basically we take those and we imprint them on people around us, starting with our kids, right? And quite often, if we grew up with a lot of fears about money, then we're like, oh, you should become a doctor or a lawyer or some other profession that's supposed to make you lots of money and stuff like that, right? Or if we're scared about, not having enough money or about health or whatever, this is the way how we project and then imprint it on our children, right? And that happens all the time, and like in some little ways and in big ways. It's like when I was growing up in the Soviet Union, I got really interested in computers as a teenager, but there was very little access, and the technology was very new, and Soviet Union was very isolated from the world. Well, as Russia is now becoming crazy kind of circle, but so I really wanted him to have access to that because pretty early on it was clear that he had a very bright mind, very curious mind, and I was really trying to feed him the stuff that I remembered was of interest to me as a child, right? And
Yeah.
I figured, okay, you know what, like as a child, I would have loved to have access to computer, and that was like beyond all the just drawing whatever kids do and playing in the sandbox. But when he was somewhere between 3 and 4, we gave him our old IBM PC. Hey, here's this toy for you, right? And he started playing with that, and it was really fascinating that he really took to that, right? And his mind was very much about numbers, and he loved playing with Excel. Again, like that old IBM PC, it's not like we could easily go out and buy a lot of fun educational software. Even like the cost was prohibitive, the access to that was very hard. But there was Microsoft Office on that computer, so he ended up playing a lot with Excel. And it was a very versatile tool even back then, and you could draw stuff and you could do this and that. But then he discovered that he could type numbers, and he figured out the formulas, and then kind of really fascinated him, right? Um, and to kind of expand on your question, right, and some other little illustrations, it's like I've heard about again in the Soviet Union. with the state doing everything, there was very little competition. So there was very limited, like what kind of toys or other things available to kids. So kind of as we got out of, Russia started changing, and we actually moved to Canada when he was about 6 years old. And I wanted to buy him all the toys that I could see, like, oh, check out this Lego construction set and this and that. And I would buy them for him, again, like, projecting my own desire to play with those things and whatever. But then instead of building those, space planes or whatever, he was actually trying to build numbers from Legos and whatnot, right? So returning to your original question, what I now deeply think is that, deeply convinced in, is that the best way, the most important way we as parents can nurture our children is to be sensitive to what they want to do, to be sensitive to what they like, to be sensitive to their emotions, to be sensitive to who they are. Because again, most of the time, that's not what we do. We have our projection. This is how you will be successful and happy and whatever, right? And especially entrepreneurs, right? As entrepreneurs are typically achievers. So like, we want to do stuff, we want to achieve stuff. So like, hey, this is a program, you have to do this, you have to go there, you have to do this, right? It's like very common that we project that. But again, like, my personal conviction is that this is not the way you support a happy human being. Because for me, I would say this, like, success, or, people seek happiness, but quite often they misunderstand that, and they think that they can find that through success or pleasure or love or family or whatever. But they cannot, it's kind of like, it's only found, if you will, in the direct recognition of the happiness of what is. And the happiness of what is, like, again, children, they have their own unique preferences and desires and issues and sensitivities and whatnot. And also, besides my son, I have two young daughters. And as they were growing up, I was trying to also get them interested in this, in computer sciences, and there are games that teach children this stuff and that stuff. But that didn't quite work for them. My other daughter, one of my older daughters, she turned out to be a wonderful artist, and she's really good with that stuff, right? So again, like, it was really important for us to not push our own preferences and thoughts of who she should be, but rather support her in her own journey, right? And then the youngest daughter, she's 10 now. She's still discovering herself, and she has interest in all kinds of things, right? So again, to conclude my very long answers to your question,
no, that's great.
It's like, it's not about a certain recipe. There's no recipe. That's really my answer. Like, as long as we think there's a recipe for nurturing a happy, successful human being, we will struggle. But the thing is, like, as long as we're sensitive, right? And that sensitivity starts with ourselves. So something happens with our child, and again, like, a child grows up, and I'm sure that you have encountered that. Then here's this pattern of behavior, or here's something about them that we are scared. Oh, this is not right. And then, God forbid, then there are some experts or doctors and say, oh, here's the label for your child. They have this and that, right? And they're like, oh, they have a label. Should I give them some magical pills that now resolve this problem? But the thing is, like, a human being is not a box where you could put labels on, then fix the problems, whatever. They're really infinite. It's like, and as long as we can just be, again, sensitive to what is happening, support them in that, nurture them in that, be with that, that is our contribution to who they become. And just one last thing that I want to mention before that, right? Also, a child is not, like, people quite often ask me, are you proud of what Vitalik has become? And in a way, you can say that I'm very happy for everything he has achieved and everything, right, that happened to him. And I'm very excited about the possibility of having a front row seat to this whole Web3 movement. But also, what? I was just one of so many humans influencing and nurturing him, for myself and his mom and his stepmom, his grandparents, his school, the environment here in Canada, all of those things, that saying that a child is made by whole village or whatever is the saying goes, right? I deeply believe in that.
That's fabulous. And one of the things that, and I agree with everything you just said, and it's a lot easier to say than it is to do, to take that step back and allow them to grow
Yes,
like that. From you, as at that time when again, you had an active business, you're an entrepreneur, and we understand, again, struggling versus succeeding is almost the same thing. So you're putting a lot
yeah,
of time and energy and effort into work. It,
yes.
how much time do you think that you were spending allowing Vitalik to listen to what you were doing, or talking to him about what you did in a
Quite a
day-to-day
bit, quite a
operation?
bit. Like that's all in all. That's also my philosophy for successful business. I believe that in the modern world, successful businesses is different, very different from the old hierarchical structures, which suppose that here's the top commander that knows the best, knows the best way to move forward, and then here's the hierarchy of his troops, and he says what to do, and they just implement his decisions, right? That's kind of the old model, right? And that model is totally messed up. And again, as a quick comment on current events, basically what we have in Russia, we have a paranoid, maniac Putin. He kind of has his own view of the world, and then kind of that's now implemented by his supporters and his army. That's kind of pretty crazy. And I think in a successful enterprise, it's very different. It's like successful enterprises where the whole organization is very sensitive to what is going on. And actually, I'm a huge believer in the non-hierarchical ways to organize a business, and that's kind of how I ended up restructuring my last business that I sold. And one aspect of this is I'm a huge believer in transparency. So in the businesses that I've built, or last few of them at least, is that we always had full transparency with all of our employees. How are we doing financially? What is going on with sales? What is going on with this and that? Kind of what kind of customer support issues we have and whatnot. So actually, every month we would the whole team would together collaborate and create a presentation, state of the business for the current month with all the KPIs and all the important things, and we would present it to everybody in the business. So everybody in the business had a view into what's happening with the business. And actually, then I would take that presentation from time to time, and I would actually discuss things with Vitalik. Hey, Vitalik, check it out. This is kind of what we're doing, and here are the KPIs. Here are some ways. And it was really fascinating because obviously he had a bright mind, and we had really cool discussions about things, even though he obviously didn't have specific insights into a particular customer base or things like sales and marketing, but he always had really interesting questions. What was also fascinating, jumping ahead a little bit for me to kind of looking back at that, he growing up in Canada, if you will, it's much more socialist, if you will, than the US, right? And so there was a lot of, if you will, brainwashing in the schools about the unions and this and that, and kind of more socialized approach to things, right? And that was his bias, and my bias as kind of growing up in the Soviet Union and having seen their ultimate, what it becomes when the state becomes the ultimate expression of those socialist ideas. It becomes just a rigid, totally ineffective, rigid structure that doesn't quite work. So it was interesting that the kind of discussions we had, and when he ended up leading Ethereum and building Ethereum, it was really fascinating for me that the way Ethereum is structured and the whole organization is a very different beast from a typical private enterprise, right? And most people totally, it's hard for people to understand, especially for entrepreneurs, because again, we want things to happen, we want things to be effective, we want things to happen fast and stuff like that. But Ethereum as such, it's a very different type of organization. It's built much more on open source principles. It's a very mushy, very loosely connected, however, very resilient and very creative organization. Instead of like a mechanical being that's kind of efficient at doing some stuff, it's more like something alive, something that emerges from so many people, and there is so much inefficiency, and there is so much redundancy, so much other stuff. But also now over the years, kind of watching the Ethereum community grow and develop and build what they're building, I'm really fascinated by that analogy with, like, this is much more of a life system uh, that is achieving so much and building their new infrastructure for the world, versus many businesses that end up being very efficient and but also very rigid and going in direction of, like, maximizing profit, but then really messing up the environment, messing up lives of the employees and so many other aspects, right? So this was really interesting for me to kind of, in my interaction with Vitalik, kind of see that difference in approaches and learn from that.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a very different mindset. To go from to leave communist Russia to
Yeah,
become an entrepreneur, and then your son, appears and he's got this open source, very, like open and inclusive, environment. What again, I really loved the conversation. Talk to me about some of those early like pain points that you guys maybe were butting heads, where he was like, you have experience, you're the dad, you have experience in this field. Was there any
right.
kind of those disagreements in the early days where you were like, no, 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 this is how things are done, and
Well,
some.
you see, I was also not really, if you will, imposing myself, because I was happy to, and that was also, if you will, one aspect of my parenting approach, is that as he was growing up, I see the role of a parent is to make sure the child is safe. But beyond that, I don't think it's on us to impose on them how they should be, how, what kind of views they should have. And also, our children don't learn from the things they tell them how they should think or whatever, how they should behave. They learn basically by example. They learn from how we behave around them, right? And when Vitalik was growing up, if you will, a more typical approach, if we disagree, was not like, again, quite often parenting we end up being violent. We say, when we discuss with something with our child, and the child says, why is that? And we say, oh, this is how it is. Why is that? This is how it is. And at some point, many parents, they become like, no, shut up. I said that. I'm more important, right? Because it really starts to mess up with our ego. We don't like to be questioned, right? And I hope that I didn't do too much of that. And I know that in many of our conversations, it was more like, okay, you know what? Here are the choices. My recommendation is this choice. You you can go ahead and make this other choice. Again, like uh, I'm. It's probably one aspect also of my life philosophy. Growing up in a very authoritarian environment, my personal views on life are much more, if you will, libertarian, right? So, like, I simplifying, but I think it's wrong for people to impose their views on other people. Um, so back to that, like when Vitalik was building Ethereum, I was around and I was always happy to contribute my thoughts and ideas, and I did, here and there, but uh, only if he was looking for them, only if he was open to them. But it was not like, oh, you should be doing things like this way. It was more like, oh, interesting. I would think that things should happen this way, and they're happening a different way. So I would share my opinions, but we would never really clash about this stuff, because, again, like, I'm not building that thing. He's doing that. I'm just an observer, and I have my ideas, but that's pretty much it.
Were you still running your companies during the
Yes.
startup years? So you
Yeah,
were
of course.
busy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Was he did he stay near home during those early years, or had he moved away after his travels?
Um, well, 2013 is end of 2013 is when he came up with their concept of Ethereum, right? And
Mhm.
then I would say in 2014 he was kind of, some parts of that year he was at home, parts of the year he was traveling quite a bit. Whether that was in California or some, in Switzerland and some other places around the world. But basically, ever since after that first year, he was the citizen of the world, traveling, constantly traveling, not staying in a particular place longer than a couple of weeks, but engaging with so many people worldwide, right? Because that was also one aspect of the vision of Ethereum, is for that community for to be very inclusive. Because Bitcoin, as such, because of whatever reasons, it's much more US centric, but their philosophy of the core community of the core group of people who started Ethereum. They wanted to be much more inclusive internationally as well. So that's and Vitalik kind of loved travel. He loves foreign languages, so that's one of his hobbies. So he was really happy to do that, and he still travels a lot. That's what he does, basically evangelizing, connecting with people, learning from the different participants in the ecosystem, and so on.
There's quite a few Ethereum conferences around the world, so I can only imagine
Yeah. I
he's
think
in hot
right
demand.
now one is coming up in Amsterdam.
Yeah, fabulous. All right, I have absolutely hogged the conversation so far. So, Mr. Goss, I'm gonna turn Dmitry over to you for a few questions before I jump back into it.
Yeah, I guess more of a follow-up thought. I mean, I think one of the really interesting things is that like how Vitalik has managed to actually like at least seemingly stay like a very nice, very humble guy, right? Because I think with just the massive amount of success, which is impressive in and of itself, but I think the ability to then like not, and I think many other people in the crypto space did not succeed at that, right? But I think the ability to, despite that, actually staying like a really nice guy and not becoming crazy. I mean, I think to me that's like the potentially even more impressive achievement than doing it to begin with, right? So I think
absolutely. I fully agree with you. Yeah,
I don't know. So I think that was more my thought around.
How'd you keep him humble? Were you able to hear that? How were you able to keep, how were you able to instill, and how does Vitalik stay as humble as he is?
But you see, that's a really interesting question, right? Because if I think that I instilled that, right, then it's a belief that, oh, I've done that, right? This is really a very powerful story of the ego. And if I have that pattern, then very likely I would have imprinted that on Vitalik. And then Vitalik would be like, oh, check out Ethereum, check out, all that they have done, right? So actually, my belief that I have not instilled that got reflected, if you will, in the fact that it got instilled on him, right? Again, like, so humans just pick up our behavior versus what we tell them, oh, this is how you should be, this is the right way to be, right? So in general, I would say that end of the day, we humans, what we seek is that freedom and happiness, right? And I think that he ended up being one of lucky humans who was not who ended up with a lot of internal freedom, right? And when we have this internal freedom, then we just do stuff. We don't do stuff because we want to be seen as successful, as important, as this and that. But we do stuff because we're curious about it, because it feels good. And and actually, whenever we find a human being like that, it's very attractive to us, right? And actually, it was really interesting to observe that in early years of Ethereum, Vitalik didn't want to be the leader of Ethereum, and he actually was trying to find some other people who would run this and take this forward. He just wanted to do his research and whatnot. But it was interesting that other people in their Ethereum community, they were pushing him back into the forefront, saying, no, Vitalik, you know what? We actually want you to lead this community forward, right? But it's also very different kind of leadership, because again, it's not the kind of leadership that you see in typical corporation when you have this powerful CEO that gives orders. That's not the way Ethereum community is structured at all. He is a thought leader, but the way he leads, he basically does his research, he talks to people, he shares like, hey guys, I think this would be a good idea. But again, the way he does that is like, here it is, right? And then some people might act on that. Like, for example, I don't know if you ever come across a story of Uniswap, which is the largest decentralized exchange. But if you just Google Uniswap history, you will find the story of how that happened to be. And it's really fascinating. It was just happened out of an idea. And then some people happened to take this idea and move this forward. And so many things in Ethereum, this is how they basically happen. It's like, some people come up with ideas, other people think that they're good and bad. There's discussion, but it's not like somehow centralized, organized in some centralized manner, in an efficient manner. And it's interesting that I've come across over the years, I've come across quite a bit of criticism from VC community, for example, that no, Ethereum is not doing it right. They should just like become efficient. They should hire all these developers and do this and do that. And you know what? It really depends, right? It depends
Yeah.
on what you're optimizing for. If they were optimizing for creating a specific product, making maybe the most money or whatever it is, right? Maybe they're right, but that's not what Ethereum is optimizing for. They actually, it's much more of an emergent structure that is optimized for creativity and resiliency, not necessarily for efficiency and the speed of achieving those things and so on.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Ross?
I mean, I know there's like a ton of co-founders as well. So to me, as somebody who's run companies, right, if there's that many people involved, that sounds hard. But it's a really interesting point of the more consensus-led organizational structure, I guess, especially with your entrepreneurial background too. I mean, that's just a fascinating thing of how that worked really well. And I think DAOs are kind of becoming that as well. But then it feels like we haven't really figured out DAOs yet, in a sense of they seem to make some weird decisions.
We're so early, right? I do think that DAOs are the future of how humans will organize, but I think that most of the time, quite often, they're very messy, and there's a lot of reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of all kinds of issues with DAOs, right? And and that's the beauty, and humans do all that all the time, right? It's funny that I think that a lot of DAOs would do well to learn the lessons humanity has already learned from building corporations and non-hierarchical corporations and things such as guilds and so on, right? And we're learning from that. But quite often we also, I think especially, I've seen that a lot in technology. All of my life I've been in technology. It's like, when you build a system and then developers, new development team comes in and says, oh, that's a piece of crap. We should build it from scratch. It will be so much better, right? But again, it's really important for us humans to, even when we do something that feels and seems very new and very different, but okay, let's look back at the history. Let's look at the lessons. What can we learn from that?
So, I mean, was Ethereum as messy back then as DAOs are now, and it's just kind of gotten more organized? And is that messiness what made it so creative? Or was it not as, and I don't know, I'm just, obviously it's a vast generalization, but it really feels like a lot of the DAOs, I don't know, it just feels, and being YPO, right? Leadership is a huge part of YPO. So it's kind of that viewpoint.
Yes.
So I'm really curious of how that leadership actually ended up working with that many people, and if the lack of leadership really was what led to the creativity.
Yeah, I mean, it was very messy, no question about that, right? And actually, it's also funny that now to the success of Ethereum, we have all these co-founders, right? And there's no question there were actually many extremely important contributors to what the way Ethereum has evolved, but many of very important contributors have never claimed to be co-founders, anything like that. And also I know quite a number of people who are called co-founders, but they really had very limited and sometimes even detrimental impact to the organization, but whatever it is, right? So yes, it was a very messy structure but also with a lot of different people doing different things. And that's again, there was a lot of freedom and creativity in that process, but also a lot of messiness, a lot of loss of inefficiency, not necessarily moving in a certain direction. There was more like a living organism, running, moving around, versus an army marching toward a certain direction with a certain plan.
Oh man, yeah, that's so wild. I mean, it's so interesting to see how that ended up working out, because I feel like if you tell most CEOs that run organizations oh, let's try this, they would be like, oh wow, you are crazy. That is never going to have even any chance of working, right? So it's just so interesting how the use case and the economic model and the team and the leadership structure just kind of all came together in this case and just ended up being this just totally new, totally different thing. Versus, I don't know, if somebody else had been leading it, it would have been more of they could have made a mistake early on and hired an MBA that did spreadsheets to help lead, and it would have turned into something completely different, is my guess, right? I don't know, somebody from McKinsey or somebody would have just it would have just turned out to be something completely different.
And I've come across this concept, metaphor, if you will, is that uh, any kind of initiative or a project has the highest chances of succeeding when its organizational structure maps to the goal of the project, right? And the thing is, like, given that the mission, the purpose of Ethereum is this decentralized infrastructure for the world, I don't believe that that can be achieved, could have been achieved by some kind of rigid centralized structure. And for example, kind of when I look at some other competing efforts like Solana, which seems like to be wonderful, well organized, very efficient system, but the way they're going and their compromises they make with centralization, for me, that's like, I I have questions about their viability of that approach in terms of building that infrastructure, right? And for a whole bunch of reasons, and that for me also became more obvious in 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 the current in the view of current events, with the war and all the various efforts at regulation and censorship and sanctions and whatnot.
Yeah, I think the multi-chainness of the ecosystem is definitely going to be just hugely impactful, right? I think where is it going to trend to? Because it seems like a lot of the newer chains definitely trend to lesser levels of decentralization, just mostly because they kind of have
Yeah.
to if they want to actually deliver on something, right? But so it's going to be really interesting if
Yes.
there's going to be this like whole ecosystem of hundreds of chains with varying levels of decentralization for different use cases. Because I don't know, I think that's where I somewhat disagree on some of the like everything has to be maximally decentralized, right? Some things like it's fine if it's just less decentralized, right? So I think it's gonna be really interesting to see where that ends up going. But then do you just slide back
Yes.
into a lack of decentralization just once you go down that road? So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And it's fascinating that when we do that, right? But then life brings us all kinds of events and surprises, right? And like here in Canada, we had those protests, and then the government decided to really stomp on them, and they ended up doing this crazy financial censorship of people who protested, including going after their crypto. And then also people who thought like, oh yeah, crypto is decentralized and wonderful and out of government reach, but they realized, oh, but if I keep my money on a centralized exchange, it's actually still very much a centralized system, and it's not out of government reach. So I think there sanctions and the censorship stuff like that. They were really important wake up calls for people who like doing stuff and like, oh wow, look at the current events. Things are actually different than I thought.
Yeah, I think your point is really valid there on to of like the level of understanding people have, right? Because there's all these stats of like, oh, whatever, 20% of Americans own crypto, right? But it's like no percent of that is actually like on chain, right? I think there's like 10 million active monthly addresses on Ethereum, right? It's like this really, really low number of actual on
Right.
chain activity. And so the difference there is just
Mm-hmm.
like, I think once people actually start understanding what it actually is and not just like, oh, it's the speculative asset I buy on Coinbase and just kind of hold. I
Yes.
really am super excited to see because I mean, a lot of these concepts, right, where it's just like Web3, I mean, it's not about like just making money so everyone gets a bit richer, right? I mean, there's so many like the decentralization, all that stuff, like how it impacts everyone. I'm super psyched to see how that kind of ends up
Yes.
turning out.
Yes, for me, it's really about their possibilities for inclusivity for humans all around the globe to be participants in the worldwide economy, right? Like if you're a bright kid in Pakistan and you have internet connection, there's stuff that you can do. There's actually awesome stuff you can do. You can build a wonderful DeFi startup. You can actually be an artist somewhere in Ukraine and you can create wonderful art and sell it and fundraise for the efforts to support Ukraine, stuff like that. It's really fascinating how those things are now becoming actually now possible.
So real quick, Dmitry, and I want to dive in on a couple of things. The world has changed quite a bit since the original white paper for Bitcoin, which was probably started back in 2008ish, and
Hmm.
now that there's so much worry about the not just the economy, but now ecological
Yes.
impact. And clearly, Bitcoin is a proof of work, and I don't believe it will ever change from proof of work. And Ethereum was started as proof of work, and it's very, very solid. What's your feelings on the conversion that's currently happening today? And
Yeah,
I think that they even deployed a test net that just a few days ago that's moving to
yeah,
proof of stake. What's your feelings on this conversion?
yeah. It's a really fascinating discussion about this stuff because it's really interesting because obviously Bitcoin and Ethereum and all cryptocurrencies are very complex technologies. There's a lot of cryptography and math and incredible engineering behind all of them. Starting with Bitcoin again is the granddaddy of all of that. And then as that very complex stuff is being explained to a wider audience, we have to use metaphors and simplifications, right? And then we use terms like mining and proof of work and whatever, right? And it's really interesting that people end up totally getting lost in those metaphors. So for me, if we go outside of those simplistic metaphors, right? So what is mining? Mining is a way for computers that want to participate in this, to basically provide their services to this decentralized system, to get paid for their services. This is what mining is in a nutshell. And they get paid from transaction fees, and also the system pays a little bit on top by creating new currency on top of that, right? So, and there is a mechanism that ensures the fairness and prevents fraud of that process. That those computers, the service and the networks, the people providing those computing services, that they've been held honest. And the thing is, and this is just technology based on a whole bunch of, again, wonderful ideas, cryptography, engineering. And if you look at any technologies that we humans have invented, all technologies, we always invent something better. You cannot point to a specific technology and say, oh, we've never improved on that technology. Well, we have. We had the steam engines, and we have combustion engines. Now we have electrical engines, and so on, right? This is unstoppable. Progress is unstoppable. And this is even much more the case in computer technology. So basically, if we use this very high-level understanding and we say, okay, there is technology used in Bitcoin, and we call the technology proof of work, and that technology is used to ensure the fairness and to keep those people providing their services, to keep them honest. So the question is and that technology has certain characteristics, and one of them is it uses a lot of energy because of the way that particular technology is structured. And again, it was a wonderful invention at the time, and now at the scale that I don't think that even the original inventor of Bitcoin could have imagined, that technology is using lots and lots of energy, right? So now is the question, will humans be able to improve on that technology, right? And for me, the answer is obvious. Of course, we will, because we're humans. This is what we do. We always invent that, right? It's not necessarily easy. It takes time, right? Because again, Ethereum was launched with a clear mission that yes, we will switch to proof of stake, and they actually thought that would happen within a couple of years from the launch. That's not what happened, because they totally underestimated the complexity of research and engineering to make sure that the new technology of mining, proof of stake, the goal was to make sure that it can provide the same security guarantees, but also greatly improve on the efficiency of that technological algorithm. And I believe, from kind of me watching that unfold over the last, whatever it is, 7-8 years, that I think that the problem has now been solved. And again, Ethereum have launched a proof of stake a year and a half ago as a kind of as a secondary system to the main system that still runs proof of work. And they've been very, very careful in testing this, and kind of that final switchover is going to happen probably sometime this summer. I'm here in July, August, most likely. So there was a lot of thinking put into this. And again, that took lots of very smart people many, many years to get to this point. But now that when Ethereum proves that to the whole world that this is possible, right? And proof of stake, the way it's realized on Ethereum, will decrease their energy requirements by a factor of something like, I forgot, but let's say a couple of hundred. That's on this scale, right? So I think this is wonderful, right? And in the same way that, there was a coal engine and a combustion engine and electrical engine, things will get improved. So proof of stake is not going to be the final answer, but it is a wonderful improvement, right? And I think that Bitcoin will have to deal with that situation somehow. I don't know how and what will unfold in that ecosystem, but I'm very excited that Ethereum is finally fulfilling the original purpose, the goal of kind of moving forward with the technology that provides actually same and better security at much, much lower cost to the environment.
So the belief is the security of Ethereum's proof of stake rollout is actually better than the proof of work originally implemented.
Yes,
right?
because again, like security engineers, they know that security is not an abstract concept. It's like security against what, right? Like you have to look at particular scenarios, and the particular scenario that for major public blockchains is like, okay, what if somebody decides to attack the system, right? For whatever reason, they want to censor that and stuff like that. So how do you deal with that, right? And kind of and there was a lot of wonderful research and write-ups on the different scenarios, right? And I think that their depth of protection, their depth of security layers provided by proof of stake, they're actually much, much, much higher than anything that proof of work can do, because end of the day, there was only like a couple of rounds of play before proof of work gets overwhelmed if a really powerful aggressor starts attacking the system, But for proof of stake, that's a game that can be played for a long, long time.
Yeah, I've always been confused. I understand proof of work, obviously, but I think the one thing that's always kind of like eluded me is like proof of work just seems like proof of stake. Just you stake into hardware, right? You have to go buy hardware and power with your money. And it just feels like this extra step that proof of stake kind of just avoids, right? But I mean, you're staking your money into whatever 24 months worth of hardware, right? Yes. And then you're deploying it. So I never really got the logic of now maybe it's more accessible, but you still have to maybe it was different 5 years ago, 10 years ago, right? And you just run it on your computer. But I feel like today, we have massive mining pools, massive there's like 4 or 5 hardware manufacturers, right? It just feels like the centralization aspects on that end have just become huge. And so it feels like you're just avoiding.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Like, when I talk to some people now, some friends, and they're thinking about getting into proof of work mining, and I'm like, hey guys, at this point, for a small guy to get into this business, it's like, $1 that you put into this will be only worth like at most like 10% of the dollar that the big guy puts into this, just because they get the economies of scale, access to much cheaper electricity, their discounts on hardware and so on, right? But in proof of stake, it's like, you put $1, I put $1, our dollars, we might have different number of dollars, different amounts, right? But our respective returns are the same. So it's much more democratic, if you will.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm super excited for the proof of stake switch.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, and I really never talk about, too much of tokenomics, but, with Ethereum, you guys were kind of the leaders of going, okay, we're going to deploy this. It's going to have real use case. Was there ever a thought, and, I kind of am referring a little bit to the gas prices, which is, if anyone's going to make any complaint about Ethereum, it's just the gas prices, which is, part of why it is secure. But, was there ever, I'm sure there was a concern, but how did we end up here with these high gas prices? And, what's kind of the thoughts of how to get that down?
Well, it's very simple end of the day, because the only reason we have gas is to prevent the system from being spammed. And then gas prices, the current gas price is just a function of how much demand is out there now for, you can, one of the metaphors that I use for blockchains is they're like a public notary. Everybody submits their transactions to them, and then just like they verify, they stamp them, and so on, right? And the public notary, they have to do their job really well to be trustworthy, right? So that's like we trust countries like Switzerland for this and that, and so the thing is like you have this system, and they have to do a really thorough job to make sure that the things they stamp and notarize, in the case of blockchain, basically verifying the transactions that yes, this guy had this money, they transferred this money to this guy, the transaction got executed. They have to be very thorough about this, right? And the thing is, like, as the society recognizes a huge value in that this public infrastructure system can now do this instead of me going to this hugely inefficient, centralized, I don't know, land ownership thing, or this government. Instead, all of this can be notarized by this public blockchain in a very efficient manner. So demand has skyrocketed, right? But the system only has this much capacity. So really, it's a matter of capacity, right? And so the merge, the proof of stake switch, it's not going to change that in particular. And in the case of Ethereum, again, like, it was really fascinating to watch how much effort and research and thinking and engineering went into this whole resolving this particular question for the last, again, 7-8 years. And the answer to that is rollups, right? And again, this is built on a really very new branch of technology. I remember when I was learning about zero knowledge math, just superficially, it's a very fascinating, very complex area of mathematics, which was very theoretical just 10 years ago. I remember I was walking around with Vitalik and we were talking about zero knowledge stuff, like, let's say maybe 6 years ago, and he was excited about some of the breakthroughs about this stuff, and well, maybe we will soon be able to apply some of this. But again, just in math and cryptography, like, the unimaginable advances of that particular branch of math has led us to this, that now we can actually build those rollups on Ethereum that greatly increase the throughput of the system by a factor of hundreds and thousands, while maintaining full security that provided by the Ethereum blockchain. So that is being solved. It is extremely complex and powerful engineering problem. And I have seen some of the new blockchains being very happy. Oh, check out our low gas price, whatnot. But then they end up being DDoSed and stuff like that, being spam. Because as soon as you have enough activity, I mean, you cannot get around the basics of, it's all a matter of very simple fundamental things. Demand, supply, human behavior, people want to cheat, people want to spam, people want to become first in the line. It's very human. So the system, there's no magic answer to that, except for a lot of very careful engineering, game theory, and building the system that is kind of finding the balance between, how do you deal with those edge cases while providing the reliable, verifiable way for people to notarize their transactions on the public blockchain. So yeah, that is being solved. And I basically think that this is the year, 2022 is the year when we will see wide adoption of those L2 technologies. And, you guys, I'm sure, have heard about many of them from Arbitrum and Optimism and ZK Sync and many others, and Polygon.
Yeah. Oh, it is a thriving ecosystem to tie on to Ethereum. And yes. Again, there's layer zeros, layer twos, layer threes. There's going to be tons of these things. You also, just kind of, and again, I refer to you because you're part of this entire movement. You spawned this NFT, the thought of these non-fungible tokens that can have, right now the craze is these, profile pictures and some JPEGs, and we understand the utility behind them. But the door that opens for smart contracts can be visualized through NFTs, online. Yeah. What's kind of been, as you as an entrepreneur and having, insight into these, what happened in your brain when you saw this technology evolving to where it is today?
It took me a while to get it, frankly. I was sitting on the sidelines. I was just like, what is this? Like, this makes sense. And, the valuations that they're Bored Apes and the CryptoPunks were getting, I'm like, what is this thing? And like, again, logically it did make sense. And then at some point I think it was like last summer, and I was meditating. I'm like, okay, what if I just play with that? And I actually ended up taking some of my Bitcoin. I have some Bitcoin holdings. I exchanged them into Ether and said, what? Let me play with that. And I'm not expecting any return.
I'd like to just pause real quick and point out that you had to buy some Ethereum.
Yes, exactly. Right. So obviously you have to, like, Ethereum being the major ecosystem for NFTs, but I have some Ethereum, but I don't want to spend that. So I'm like, what? Like, I have more questions about the future of Bitcoin personally at the time. So why don't I use that to play with NFTs? And I started playing, and then like my eyes has opened because I realized it's not about just technology, but it's really about so much more. It's about sense of community. It's about other things. Like again, like we humans, we have very foundational, basic human drives. Like we want to, for example, we want to look unique and different, right? And we buy expensive watches, we buy cars, we buy whatever, right? Uh, However, as you guys can see, a lot of the human activity is moving to the digital universe. So how do you fulfill the same need to look unique and different, or be part of the club, right? Like, in the real world, you can put on a jersey with your favorite team logo, and like now you're part of the team, part of the community. Well, NFTs, they do that. They can be a beautiful piece of art that you can show off and say, yes, this is mine. I own this digital piece of art. Or you can you can be part of this club, or I own a CryptoPunk. I'm part of this movement, right? So NFTs, they have actually very deep underlying psychological needs of human beings that human beings have been realizing, throughout their millennia. But now this is what they can do in the digital world.
Any projects
that's
that you just
really
love?
You know what? Like I mostly ended up getting interested in one-on-one art, and ended up just collecting a whole bunch of pieces from wonderful people all around the world. And I got to meet many wonderful artists from Russia, Ukraine, Turkey, Iran, Venezuela, any country you name, right? And just getting in touch with them and just developing a relationship with them. And I ended up just playing with some of the things. For me, like it was all about fun. I got a Pudgy Penguin. I never got into CryptoPunks or Bored Apes because I just couldn't believe how much they were growing and all of that stuff. But I did get into some others. And there was one particular project early on when I just opened into NFTs, and I think what's the name of them? Little teddy bear, something like that. I ended up minting like a whole 100 of them, and they were very inexpensive. But I just love the whimsical, fun imagery that they were providing. I'm like, yeah, and people want to have fun. That's why we as humans, we play all those games and, like Candy Crush and whatever else we do. Like, again, like, we have to look beyond the technology. You have to look at those very foundational human drives, what we want to do. And actually, I wanted to comment on that. I think that one aspect of this whole Web3 movement that people, maybe many people don't quite understand yet, but it's a very big evolution for human society, because we used to outsource some very important aspects of our. So as a human being, I want resources to be alive, to thrive and so on, right? And resources, for me to manage my resources, I need money. And we have delegated our ownership of money to our governments. And our governments, for the most part, really abuse that, the privilege we gave them to manage that. They ended up with inflation, misusing our money, corruption, lack of transparency and stuff like that. So Bitcoin was a wonderful, very important step for humans to take that back and say, you know what? I can now manage to own my own money. So this was a big deal. And I think with NFTs, now that takes it to the next stage. It's like, oh, you know what? Like I can now own, and for human beings, it's important to own stuff, right? It's very basic function of our ego. It's like, here's me, here's my stuff, right? Again, it's very foundational to any kind of conscious being. It's like an NFTs is a really wonderful way. Like now, here's my art, or here's my, I bought this, I have this transaction, like on many projects that I have seen, NFT projects now, for example, I minted a whole bunch of stuff in support of Ukraine. And now that's kind of I own that. It's not like that corporation that they have the records or whatever it is. They actually don't know who minted those things. But me, in my own digital wallet, I have those things. So now the balance of power is shifting. Instead of some entity like Facebook, keeping track of you, and then they have all of your data, they sell it to corporation. Now the balance of power is shifting to me as a human being. I now have my digital receipts, my NFTs, my digital currency, and I can decide who do I tell what I own. Do I own the CryptoPunk? Do I own, this cryptocurrency? And I can prove it to you if I want to. But again, like, what do you give me for that, right? It's a big shift, and this fundamental relationship between humans and organizational entities, if you will.
Absolutely. Goss?
Yeah, I know. I just wanted to comment. I think for me, what really helped make NFTs click is to compare them less to art. Because I mean, like, I've never owned art.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I know very few people that actually own art, right? So it was always like, wait, why does
Mm-hmm.
suddenly everyone care about art? And really, more to what you were saying, right? It's much more like a luxury brand, right? Most
Right.
people want a fancy car, right? And so I think just that
Yeah.
comparison of like, no, 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 this is just the next evolution of owning fancy things. And that's why it makes so
Yes.
much more sense that everyone suddenly cares, right? Where it's like, oh shit, no, this is just a way of buying a Ferrari just digitally, right? And so I think as long as we all agree that it's equally cool as a Ferrari, then it's probably worth equally much as a Ferrari, right? So I think just that total mindset shift of like, no, 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 it's just that next iteration, which is why they've been so powerful
Yes.
and why they changed so quickly as well.
So Dmitry, you're again, you're a citizen of the world at this point. But born in communist Russia, you spent time in Ukraine, and then you've also, Canada, and probably the world is your oyster. How do you see, the current kind of conjunction between blockchain technology and
Mm-hmm.
governments and politics? What are you seeing from your perspective?
Yeah. I think it's uh, again, if I look specifically at the Russian invasion of Ukraine, obviously in very important dimension that this is a horrible human tragedy, and also it will be, I believe, an impulse. It will have a major impact on further adoption of crypto stuff, right? Because what I have seen huge success by Ukrainian government and various, actually just a lot of people in the Ukraine mobilizing and fundraising through crypto. Because again, as the war has started, and the regular systems got disrupted, the sanctions and all kinds of stuff. But then I have seen so many people start DAOs, fundraise through their NFT projects, uh, just like using the secure crypto communications and stuff like that to just like mobilize and support what they do. And I think that I think actually Ukraine has a really good chance of becoming their world capital for crypto, because again, in many countries, as you know, there are all these processes. The government's trying to figure out, oh, what do we do, and do we regulate that, do we prohibit that, and whatnot. And I think that Ukraine, they had to really shortcut through this process just because of the extreme circumstances they're in. And the answer is like, no, you know what, this is a wonderful tool, so let's go forward with that. So kind of like looking at success, they raised like few hundred million from what I've heard already through crypto channels in that. So they're actually going full on into the crypto space, and I think that the regulations coming out of that, on the one hand. Also, I think that many people in the world just observing from outside and like seeing the sanctions, seeing like the money being confiscated, or people being deplatformed and stuff like that. I think it's a big wake up call for many humans. Like, oh, I think maybe it's time for me to check out crypto, because people are talking that no, like if I have my crypto, people cannot take that away. And for example, uh, for a long time there was a lot of talk about, can we build a Web3 social media platform? So I think that, and finally we're getting to the point that we're, on the one hand, the technologies are matured to allow that. On the other hand, I think there's a lot more demand now for people after all the current events and the sensors that we're seeing, that people are actually asking, that there is a lot of actual demand for that. So I think that the current events, however painful they are, they also will bring forward, they will increase the demand in the world for crypto-based systems, for crypto itself, to NFTs, to new angles in crypto that have not been fully explored, like social media based on the blockchain and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's some amazing, decentralized social blockchains like what Nader's doing with Deso, Diamond, and everything else. So I think you're right on. Blockchain is going to absolutely dynamically change the planet, and whether a government wants to participate or not.
Yeah.
I always like to go by, like, crypto doesn't care. Like, if you want to believe in it, great. If you don't, it's still going to continue to exist. Proof of work, proof of stake is going to move on.
Yes.
And we've seen at this point now the complete utter failures of the Swift system. Whether whether you agree with it or not, Russia. I'm sure people that their businesses and their households were taken entirely off the international financial chain.
Yeah.
They may or may not have supported the war, or had any idea it was even happening, and they were removed from the world's economic engine. And I think that's a massive failure of the global SWIFT system.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely get their logic. Like, again, like I see their huge pain, the suffering in Ukraine, and I understand the logic, the desire to inflict as much pain on Russia as possible to stop this. Totally, fully support that. And also, I know that many people in Russia, for example, some of them who have been opposing Putin, protesting, who are in jail and they out of means of existence, and those who they bearing the effects of sanctions first before Putin and all his supporters and stuff like that. So actually, I'm happy that through crypto I was able to support some of people in Russia and connect with them. And to give you one little example, like this guy in Russia, he's an NFT artist, and as the war started, he knows that he cannot even speak out in Russia against the war because that's now a criminal offense, stuff like that. He reached out to me. He sent me his works that I minted under his own name, under my name, sorry, and I sold them on an auction, and then I matched the funds and I sent them to Ukraine. So basically, I helped him to fundraise for Ukraine through this, and he's Russian in Russia, and without crypto in this back channel, he would not be able to do that, right? So I think that people again woke up to the fact that what, it's time for us to become much more self-sovereign. We've been, if you will, for a long time, many citizens in many countries have become, used to, let's a nanny state take care of you. You know what? Nanny state will sometimes take care of you, but sometimes it will really mess you up. So I think it's time for us as human beings, as individuals, to change that direction of kind of the balance of power, if you will. And I think that in the political system, we will see the crypto, the regulations and the crypto really become a very important matter, which will become a huge factor in the elections and stuff like that.
Oh, I completely agree. And the fact that with permissionless, you can move, money, currency, art, data around the world. I mean, it is a dynamic change that puts the power back in the people,
Yes.
which is really where it should be. And again, Goss, as we kind of move towards closing here, did you have any other final questions or thoughts for Dmitry?
Nah, not from my side. This was super interesting, and it was awesome to kind of get some of the backstory. So thank you so much for taking the time.
So
For
Dmitry,
sure, guys. Yeah.
as my final kind of question or comment is, what's we generally refer to this as alpha drop. So in your case, you're kind of privy to anything and everything around the blockchain. Any other projects of people you're working with? Anyone you want to give a shout out to that you think is worthy of the yWhales community taking a look at, whether it's art, whether it's kind of a protocol or project, anything?
Not particular projects, but I would say that. I would definitely say pay a lot of attention to Ethereum level 2s, because I believe that the year 22 is when we really will start seeing a lot of really wide adoption of that, and I'm seeing some early indication of that. And most, if none, if maybe all of them, they have not launched their own token, but there is a huge possibility. And as you guys have seen in their crypto space, again, the whole concept of airdrops for the initial distribution has been widely used quite successfully. So I think that, again, the more you can engage with their blockchain Web3 ecosystem, crypto, and just like use different tools, play with that, and yeah, you might lose some money. I've lost some money to scammers. I've lost some money to some failed systems and stuff like that. But I've learned so much. And also I received some airdrops from some of the projects and being early adopter of ENS and stuff like that. So again, it really pays to be an early adopter in many ways. And for me, that would be like looking at L2 platforms on Ethereum, definitely one of their opportunities to definitely look at. And the thing is, again, having seen their humongous return on early investment in crypto, people are still looking like, oh, can we find that another 10,000 increase? Maybe not. However, you know what? Nothing is wrong with getting 20x increase over a couple of years or a few years. And I think that is quite realistic. So I think that this is a human nature that sometimes trips us up when we kind of running like, oh, we want to gamble away and maybe with the expectation of this huge return. But you know what? Like after my own experimentation with DeFi and many different things, whatever, when I kind of look back at them and compare it to the performance of Ethereum over the last couple of years, I'm like, yeah, you know what? Like very few of them have outperformed Ethereum. So you know, that kind of rush that we want the next high and success. It's not necessarily in that high risk thing, but it's something in also the whole concept of blue chips that kind of makes a lot of sense too.
Yeah, I will let you know. We just interviewed Ben Cohen a few days ago, and he's a TA specialist and whatnot. And he pulled up a chart and he goes, "There's no altcoin in a 5-year span that's ever beaten Ethereum." He goes,
Right.
"Here's the thing, Ethereum is still the number one alt. Everything else may have its peaks and valleys, but if you're it's no one's really winning in the long term over what you guys have done. So,
Right.
but I really thank you for your time today. I really appreciate your thoughts, and as well as the fact that you shared with us kind of some intimate details of how you raised a very successful son and now created this worldwide movement of which everyone will benefit whether they understand that or not. And truly, again, thank you for your contributions to the world.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you,
your
Jay.
thoughts of everything that goes
And
out.
thank you, Stefan.
And again, love to your family and friends that are going through some hard times right now.
Thank you.
Okay. yWhales, Goss, thank you guys. We'll see you next time.
Take care.